The morning sun blazed mercilessly over the Afghan desert as Lieutenant Commander Jack Morrison adjusted his tactical goggles. The SEAL Team 6 unit had been moving through the barren landscape for 3 hours, their mission clear: locate and extract a high-value intelligence asset from a remote Taliban stronghold. The sand beneath their boots shifted with each step, creating small clouds of dust that threatened to give away their position. Morrison raised his fist, signaling the team to halt. Through his binoculars, he could see the target compound roughly 2 kilometers ahead. The intel suggested minimal resistance, but something felt off. The desert was too quiet, even for this godforsaken stretch of nowhere. Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez crouched beside him, studying the terrain through his scope. "Sir, something's not right about those dunes to our east," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the desert wind. "The sand pattern looks disturbed." Morrison followed Rodriguez's gaze to a series of rolling sand dunes about 800 meters away. At first glance, they appeared natural, shaped by countless years of wind and weather. But Rodriguez had the keen eye of a sniper himself, and if he sensed something was wrong, it probably was. The team consisted of 8 elite operators, each with years of combat experience across multiple theaters. Sergeant Williams, their explosives expert, was checking his equipment for the 3rd time that morning. Chief Petty Officer Thompson kept watch on their 6, his machine gun ready for action. The newest member, Petty Officer Second Class Chun, was on his first deployment, but had proven himself during training to be exceptionally skilled in reconnaissance. Morrison made the decision to proceed with caution. They had a narrow window to complete their mission before enemy reinforcements could arrive from a nearby Taliban camp. The intelligence asset they were extracting had been feeding information to coalition forces for months, and his cover was blown. If they didn't get him out today, he would likely be executed by sunset. As the team moved forward in a tactical formation, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The desert had a way of playing tricks on the mind, but his instincts had kept him alive through 4 combat deployments. He trusted them more than any piece of technology. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace. Each operator carried nearly 80 pounds of gear, including ammunition, communication equipment, and survival supplies. The heat was beginning to take its toll, but these men were trained to push through discomfort that would break ordinary soldiers. Chun, who was monitoring their communications, suddenly held up his hand. "Sir, we're getting some electronic interference. Could be natural, but it's consistent with enemy communication equipment." Morrison frowned. The Taliban in this region weren't known for sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities. Either their intelligence was outdated, or they were walking into something more complex than anticipated. As they crested a small hill, the compound came into full view. It was a typical Afghan rural structure, mud brick walls surrounding a central courtyard, with several smaller buildings inside. But Morrison noticed details that contradicted their briefing. There were tire tracks in the sand that looked recent, and what appeared to be a communication antenna that hadn't been mentioned in their intelligence report. Rodriguez, who had taken position as their designated marksman, was scanning the area methodically. "I count 2 sentries visible, but there could be more inside. The building layout matches our satellite images, but those tracks suggest vehicle movement within the last 24 hours. Williams was already calculating the best approach for breaching the compound's walls if stealth wasn't possible. Thompson positioned himself to provide covering fire if needed. The team's coordination was seamless, the result of countless hours of training and real-world experience working together. Morrison was about to give the signal to begin their approach when Rodriguez's voice crackled through their communications system, urgent but controlled. "Movement in the dunes. Something's not natural about the sand displacement patterns." Every operator immediately shifted their attention to the east, where the suspicious dunes lay. The sand was shifting slightly, but there was no wind strong enough to cause such movement. Morrison felt his blood run cold as he realized what they might be facing. In the distance, barely visible even through their advanced optics, was the slight glint of metal. It lasted only a fraction of a second, but it was enough to confirm Morrison's worst fears. They weren't alone in this desert, and whoever was out there had chosen a perfect hiding spot with an excellent field of fire. The team was caught in the open with limited cover. The nearest substantial shelter was a rocky outcrop nearly 300 meters behind them. Moving forward toward the compound would put them in an even more vulnerable position, but retreating would mean abandoning their mission and potentially sacrificing their intelligence asset. Morrison had seconds to make a decision that could determine whether his team would make it home alive. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, offering little comfort and even less protection for whatever threat was hiding in those sand dunes. Chen's communication equipment began picking up intermittent signals that suggested coordinated movement. Williams had his explosive charges ready, but they would be useless against an enemy they couldn't see. Thompson's machine gun could provide suppressive fire, but only if they could identify their target. As the sun reached its peak, casting harsh shadows across the barren landscape, Morrison knew that their carefully planned mission had just become a deadly game of cat and mouse. Somewhere in those dunes, a skilled marksman was watching their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of wind across sand and the barely audible breathing of 8 highly trained warriors who suddenly found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about this mission. Rodriguez continued his methodical scan of the dunes, looking for any sign of their hidden adversary. His finger rested lightly on his weapon's trigger, ready to respond to the slightest threat. But against an enemy who had chosen their position so carefully, even the best-trained sniper might find himself at a disadvantage. Morrison made his choice. Hand signals flew between the team members as they prepared to move toward the rocky outcrop, sacrificing their mission timeline for tactical advantage. But as the first operator began to move, the desert's deadly secret was about to reveal itself in the most terrifying way possible. The crack of a high-powered rifle echoed across the desert like thunder. Chun dropped to the ground as a bullet whistled past his head, missing by mere inches. The sand where he had been standing exploded in a small cloud of dust and debris. "Sniper, take cover!" Morrison shouted, though his team was already moving before the words left his mouth. Years of training had conditioned them to react instantly to the sound of incoming fire. Rodriguez was scanning the dunes frantically through his scope, trying to locate the muzzle flash or any sign of their attacker. The problem with fighting in the desert was that sound could be deceptive, bouncing off sand and rocks in ways that made pinpointing a shooter's location nearly impossible. Williams' army crawled toward a small depression in the sand, his heavy pack making movement difficult. Thompson was providing suppressive fire in the general direction of the dunes, his machine gun chattering in controlled bursts. But without a clear target, he was essentially firing blind. Another shot rang out, this one coming closer to Rodriguez's position. The sniper was skilled, accounting for wind speed and distance with deadly accuracy. Morrison realized they were dealing with a professional, not some inexperienced Taliban fighter with an old rifle. "Sir, I can't get a visual on the shooter," Rodriguez reported through gritted teeth. "The sand is acting like natural camouflage. Whoever this is knows exactly what they're doing." Morrison's mind raced through their options. They were pinned down in open terrain with minimal cover. Their enemy had the high ground and concealment advantage. Calling for air support would take time they didn't have, and their extraction helicopter wasn't scheduled to arrive for another 4 hours. Chun, who had recovered from the near miss, was monitoring enemy communications. "I'm picking up multiple signals now. There might be more than one shooter out there." The thought sent a chill down Morrison's spine. One sniper was dangerous enough, but a coordinated team could pick them off one by one. He needed to change the tactical situation quickly. "Williams, how long would you need to create a smoke screen with your charges?" Morrison asked. Williams considered the question while another bullet impacted the sand near Thompson's position. "Give me 2 minutes to rig something up. I can create enough dust and smoke to give us concealment, but it won't last long in this wind. Morrison weighed their options. The smoke would hide their movement, but would also prevent them from seeing any approaching threats. It was a gamble, but staying in their current position was essentially a death sentence. As if reading his thoughts, the hidden sniper fired again. This time, the bullet found its mark, grazing Thompson's shoulder. The big man grunted in pain, but continued firing, his training overriding his body's response to injury. That's it, Morrison decided. Williams, prep your charges. Everyone else, when that smoke goes up, we move toward the compound. It's the only substantial cover available. Rodriguez was still trying to locate their tormentor when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The sand in the dunes wasn't just camouflaging a sniper's position. It was concealing an entire fighting position. Someone had spent considerable time preparing this ambush, digging into the dunes and creating firing ports that were nearly invisible from ground level. "Sir, this isn't random harassment," Rodriguez reported. "We're looking at a prepared position. Someone knew we were coming." Morrison felt the implications hit him like a physical blow. Their mission had been compromised from the beginning. The intelligence asset they were supposed to extract might already be dead, and they could be walking into a larger trap. Williams had rigged together an improvised explosive device using some of his demolition charges and materials from their packs. It wouldn't cause much damage, but it would create a substantial dust cloud. "Ready when you are, sir." Another shot cracked across the desert, this one aimed at Williams' position. The sniper was systematically targeting each member of the team, probing for weaknesses and trying to force them into making mistakes. Morrison realized that their enemy wasn't just trying to kill them, he was toying with them. A truly skilled sniper could have taken out multiple targets by now. Instead, their attacker seemed to be drawing out the engagement, possibly waiting for reinforcements or trying to capture them alive. Thompson's shoulder was bleeding steadily, but the tough Navy SEAL refused medical attention. "I can still fight, sir. Just give me a target to shoot at." Chen's communication equipment was picking up increased chatter from multiple sources. "Sir, I'm reading at least 3 different transmission sources. This is definitely a coordinated operation." Morrison made his decision. They couldn't stay pinned down any longer. "Williams, blow the charge. Everyone moves on my signal." The explosion sent a massive column of sand and dust into the air, creating an instant fog that obscured vision in all directions. Morrison gave the signal, and 8 elite operators began moving across the desert toward the compound, using the confusion as cover. But as they moved, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing directly into their enemy's hands. The sniper had forced them to abandon their carefully planned approach and move toward the compound, exactly where any additional ambush forces would be waiting. Rodriguez was moving parallel to the main group, trying to maintain overwatch despite the reduced visibility. Through the swirling dust, he caught a glimpse of movement in the dunes. Someone was repositioning, possibly preparing for a follow-up attack once the dust settled. The team reached the compound's outer walls just as the dust cloud began to dissipate. Morrison quickly assessed their new position while Thompson and Chen secured the perimeter. The walls provided solid cover from the sniper, but they had no idea what waited inside the compound itself. Williams was already checking the walls for the best breach point when Chen's equipment picked up a transmission that made everyone freeze. The voice was speaking clear English with an American accent, coordinating with multiple teams positioned around the compound. Morrison felt his world turn upside down as he realized the horrible truth. They weren't fighting Taliban insurgents or foreign fighters. They were facing American-trained operators who knew their tactics, their equipment, and possibly their specific mission parameters. The silence that followed this revelation was broken only by the sound of movement within the compound walls. Their extraction target was somewhere inside, but so were an unknown number of hostile forces who had been expecting them all along. Morrison's mind reeled as he processed the implications of what Chun had intercepted. American operators working against them meant this wasn't just a compromised mission. It was a deliberate setup. Someone with high-level access had fed false intelligence to their command structure, leading them directly into a trap. "Sir, we need to reassess everything," Rodriguez whispered urgently. "If they know our tactics and equipment, they'll anticipate our standard breach procedures." Williams nodded grimly as he examined the compound wall. Standard explosive charges would be expected. They'll have the interior positioned to counter our normal entry patterns. Thompson, despite his wounded shoulder, was maintaining watch on the perimeter. Movement in the dunes again. Our sniper friend is repositioning for a cleaner shot once we try to enter the compound. Morrison had to make a decision that went against everything in his training. Instead of proceeding with the extraction, he needed to focus on getting his team out alive. But first, they needed to understand exactly what they were facing. Chun adjusted his communication equipment to monitor the hostile transmissions more clearly. What he heard confirmed their worst fears. The American accented voice was coordinating with at least 4 different teams positioned around the compound. They had walked into a carefully orchestrated ambush designed specifically to capture or eliminate Navy SEAL operators. "Sir, they're talking about packages and high-value targets," Chun reported quietly. "I don't think they're just after our intelligence asset. I think we're the primary target." Morrison felt the pieces clicking into place. The intelligence asset had been used as bait to draw a SEAL team into a vulnerable position. Someone wanted to capture elite American operators, possibly to extract information about ongoing operations or to use them for propaganda purposes. Rodriguez had found a small gap in the compound wall that offered a view inside. What he saw made him sick to his stomach. Their supposed intelligence asset was sitting calmly in the courtyard, very much alive and apparently unharmed. He was talking casually with 3 men in tactical gear who were definitely not Taliban fighters. "Sir, the asset is alive, but he's not a prisoner. This whole thing is a setup." Morrison absorbed this information while considering their tactical options. They were outnumbered, outpositioned, and had walked directly into enemy territory based on false intelligence. Their training had prepared them for many scenarios, but not for fighting American-trained operators who knew their standard operating procedures. Williams had an idea that went against conventional tactics. "Sir, what if we don't breach the compound at all? They're expecting us to come in after the asset. What if we make them come to us?" Morrison considered this approach. It was risky, but it might be their only chance to turn the tables on their attackers. "What did you have in mind?" "I can rig the wall to look like a failed breach attempt. Make it appear we try to blow our way in, but something went wrong. They might send people out to investigate or try to flank us while we're supposedly dealing with equipment problems." It was unconventional, but Morrison realized it might work. Their enemies would expect aggressive action from Navy SEALs, not tactical deception. Do it, but make it convincing. While Williams prepared his deception, Rodriguez kept watch on the sniper position. The shooter had indeed repositioned, probably expecting the team to attempt entry soon. But there was something about the sniper's movement that bothered Rodriguez. The person moved with familiar tactical precision. Thompson was monitoring their rear when he spotted movement approaching from the direction they had come. More operators were closing off their escape route, completing the encirclement they had walked into. "Sir, we've got multiple contacts approaching from the south. They're trying to box us in completely." Morrison realized that their enemies were following a textbook encirclement pattern, one that American forces used routinely. These weren't just American-trained operators. They were likely current or former U.S. military personnel. Chen's intercepts were providing more disturbing information. The hostile teams were discussing extraction procedures and interrogation protocols. They weren't planning to kill the SEAL team immediately. They wanted to capture them alive for intelligence purposes. Williams finished his preparations and triggered a small explosion against the compound wall. To outside observers, it would appear that their breach attempt had failed, leaving them exposed and potentially dealing with wounded operators. The deception worked better than Morrison had hoped. Within minutes, the compound's main gate opened, and 3 operators emerged to investigate the apparent failed breach. They moved with professional caution, but clearly expected to find a team in disarray. Rodriguez had positioned himself for the perfect shot. As the first hostile operator came around the corner of the wall, Rodriguez's rifle spoke once. The man dropped instantly, his teammates immediately seeking cover and shouting warnings to their colleagues. The engagement that followed was unlike anything Morrison had experienced. These weren't insurgents with improvised weapons and limited training. They were professionals using advanced equipment and coordinated tactics. Every move the SEAL team made was anticipated and countered with precision. Thompson, despite his wounded shoulder, managed to eliminate 2 more hostiles with his machine gun before being forced to relocate under heavy return fire. Williams used his explosive expertise to create barriers and choke points that slowed the enemy advance. But Morrison knew they were fighting a losing battle. More operators were converging on their position, and the sniper in the dunes was still waiting for a clear shot. Their ammunition wouldn't last indefinitely, and they had no air support coming. Chen suddenly intercepted a transmission that changed everything. "Sir, they're calling in helicopter extraction for their team." 20 minutes out. Morrison realized this was their window. If hostile helicopters arrived, the SEAL team would have no chance of escape. But Chen's information also revealed something crucial. The enemy extraction point was only about 2 kilometers away, in a flat area suitable for helicopter landing. "New plan," Morrison announced. "We're going to steal their ride home." It was an audacious plan that relied on speed and surprise rather than firepower. The team would have to break contact with the forces around the compound and reach the extraction point before the enemy helicopters arrived. Rodriguez provided covering fire while the team began their tactical withdrawal. Williams left behind several booby traps to discourage pursuit. Thompson, despite his injury, carried extra ammunition for the team's remaining weapons. As they moved across the desert toward the enemy extraction point, Morrison couldn't help but wonder how high up the chain of command this betrayal reached. Someone with significant authority had orchestrated this operation, and that person was still out there, possibly planning similar traps for other American forces. The race across the desert became a test of endurance and tactical skill. Behind them, the hostile forces were reorganizing for pursuit. Ahead lay an uncertain confrontation with whoever was managing the enemy extraction. But Morrison knew that his team's only chance of survival lay in reaching that helicopter before their enemies could coordinate an effective response. As the sound of approaching aircraft echoed across the desert sky, Morrison prepared his team for what might be their final engagement. They had been betrayed by their own people, but they were still Navy SEALs, and they would fight with everything they had to get home and expose the truth about this operation.